It was a quiet Sunday morning when my wife, Anna, decided to change everything. We were lounging in the living room, me with a cup of coffee and the Sunday crossword, and her with her phone, scrolling through Pinterest for nursery inspiration. Yes, nursery. That morning, she'd announced her pregnancy. To say I was over the moon would be an understatement. We'd been married for 5 years and trying for 2, enduring late-night tears, awkward doctor's appointments, and more negative tests than I could count. This finally felt like our moment. I didn't even care that her announcement had been casual. A simple, "Oh, by the way, I took a test this morning. We're having a baby." It wasn't her style to make a big production out of anything, but I was too elated to think much of it. I remember how she laughed as I sprang to my feet, pulling her into a hug. "Careful," she teased, patting her belly. "There's precious cargo on board now." The rest of the day was a blur of celebratory phone calls, plans for the future, and Anna insisting she felt fine. Tired, but fine. As the weeks went on, she seemed to glow brighter with every passing day, and I threw myself into preparing for fatherhood. Crib shopping, assembling a stroller, baby-proofing the house. It all became my new routine. Looking back, I realized the cracks had already started to form. The late-night text messages she claimed were just work, the sudden interest in keeping her phone locked, the uncharacteristically frequent girls' nights that coincided with her newfound social energy. But I was blinded by the joy of impending fatherhood. After all, why would I suspect anything else? That bliss was shattered when I stumbled upon the first clue. But we're not there yet. This is just the beginning. It started with something small, almost laughably so. One night, while I was tidying up the kitchen after dinner, Anna's phone buzzed on the counter. She was upstairs folding laundry, so I glanced at the screen out of habit. It wasn't a message, just a notification from some app one didn't recognize. Snap pic, it read, followed by a name, Lucas. I wouldn't have thought much of it. Anna had plenty of friends, and we weren't the type of couple who policed each other's social lives. But something about it gnawed at me. Lucas. The name wasn't familiar. I didn't recall her mentioning anyone by that name before, especially not someone important enough to warrant late-night notifications. When she came back downstairs, I handed her the phone casually, mentioning the buzz. She glanced at the screen and quickly swiped the notification away, her smile just a little too tight. "Work stuff," she said, brushing past me. "Lucas is one of the new designers at the firm." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but the way she avoided my eyes set off a quiet alarm in my chest. Still, I let it slide, telling myself I was overthinking things. Anna was pregnant, her emotions were all over the place, and she deserved my trust. But over the next few weeks, those late-night notifications kept coming. "Work deadlines," she'd say with a shrug, or, "Lucas needed some advice on a project." I told myself it wasn't worth questioning. After all, wasn't it possible I was just being paranoid? Then came the slip. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were out shopping for baby clothes. I was holding up a tiny onesie, grinning like an idiot when I said, "Can you believe we're actually doing this? We're going to be parents." She froze for just a second, her hand pausing over a rack of baby blankets. It was so brief that I almost missed it, but I didn't. "Yeah," she said, her voice light. "It's crazy, isn't it? Crazy. Not exciting. Not amazing. Crazy." I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. That night, after Anna fell asleep, I sat in the living room, staring at my hands. There was nothing concrete, just this growing unease that I couldn't ignore. That's when I made the decision. I had to know the truth. Whether it was paranoia, insecurity, or something more, I couldn't live with this doubt gnawing away at me. So I started looking. Once I made the decision to dig deeper, I told myself I'd keep it subtle. I wasn't proud of snooping. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. But the weight in my chest had grown too heavy to ignore. The first step was her phone. I waited until she was in the shower one evening. The sound of water running gave me just enough time to act. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging. My hands felt clammy as I picked it up, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and determination. Her password hadn't changed, and that small detail gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I'd find nothing, and I could chastise myself for doubting her. But when I opened her messages, there it was, Lucas. Their thread wasn't long, but it was enough. Most of it was about work, design concepts, timelines, client feedback. It all looked harmless at first, but the deeper I scrolled, the more it shifted. Thanks for last night. One message read. I don't know what I'd do without you. Don't worry, he replied. You're not in this alone. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. What could that mean? I wanted to believe it was something innocent. A kind gesture, a moment of emotional support between colleagues. But then came the photo. A picture of Anna, sitting at a small cafe table. She was smiling, a plate of food untouched in front of her. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 nights ago, one of her girls' nights. I put the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Who was this guy? Was this innocent or something more? Was I jumping to conclusions? When Anna came out of the shower, towel wrapped around her, she gave me a puzzled look. You okay? She asked. Yeah. I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the messages flashed in my mind. The photo, her smile, that unfamiliar cafe. I needed to know more. And if her phone gave me the first clue, I had a feeling her sudden, overly guarded behavior would give me the next. The following days were a whirlwind of half-truths, fake smiles, and carefully crafted questions. I felt like a stranger in my own life, walking on a tightrope between confrontation and discovery. Anna was still radiant, glowing in that way pregnant women do, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but wonder if that glow hid something else entirely. I decided to take a deeper dive into her world. If there was one thing Anna loved, it was her routines, her favorite coffee shop, her go-to lunch spots, the yoga studio she swore kept her sane. I started with those, observing from a distance. It didn't take long to confirm what I feared. Wednesday afternoon, I left work early, claiming I wasn't feeling well. I parked across from the cafe Anna loved, the same one from Lucas's photo. It was busy, as usual, patrons streaming in and out with steaming cups and small plates. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I saw her. Anna walked out, her coat draped over her arm. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, smiling and laughing, was Lucas. I recognized him immediately from the photo. Tall, dark-haired, and annoyingly attractive in that effortless way that made my stomach turn. They didn't touch, but their body language was intimate. Leaning close as they talked, their laughter too personal for mere co-workers. They lingered on the sidewalk, as if reluctant to part ways, before Lucas finally hailed a cab and disappeared. Anna watched it drive off, a small smile playing on her lips, before heading to her car. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I kept observing, watching, waiting. The following week, I noticed another change. Anna had been secretive about her doctor's appointments, insisting she wanted to handle them on her own since work was stressful enough. But when I casually asked her about the latest visit, she fumbled for details. It's all routine, she said, brushing it off. The baby's fine. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. I could feel it in my gut. The real unraveling started when I came across the receipt. It was in her purse, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. She rarely left her bag lying around, but she'd been distracted, chatting with a friend on the phone. I only meant to grab her keys to move her car out of the driveway, but a slip of paper caught my eye. It was from a hotel. Not in town, but close enough to raise suspicion. The date? The same night as one of her girls' nights. Room 315. Dinner for 2. My head spun as I stared at the receipt. I felt like my world was tipping sideways, the solid ground I thought I stood on giving way beneath me. I had all the pieces, they just weren't making sense yet. The time for quiet observation was over. Now I needed answers. The receipt burned a hole in my pocket. I carried it everywhere for days, like a cursed talisman, a reminder that my perfect life might not be so perfect after all. Every time I looked at it, My emotions swung wildly: rage, heartbreak, disbelief. But more than anything, I felt a gnawing need to understand why. Why would Anna risk everything? Why now, when we were supposed to be starting a family? I needed a plan, a way to confirm my suspicions without tipping my hand too soon. Confronting her outright felt premature. She'd lie, of course. She'd make excuses. And I didn't want to accuse her without undeniable proof. So, I took a page out of a detective novel and got creative. I started small, tracking patterns, taking notes, even marking dates on a calendar. Every late-night text from Lucas. Every time she came home later than expected. Every time her explanations felt off. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there were still gaps. I needed to fill them. That's when I remembered the app. A few months ago, Anna had asked me to install a family locator app on her phone, just in case of emergencies. It was supposed to give us peace of mind if we ever got separated or if her phone was lost. At the time, it seemed practical, even sweet. But now, it became a tool for my investigation. I logged in late one night, careful not to wake her. The app pinged her phone's location history, and sure enough, the hotel from the receipt was on the list. She'd been there twice in the past month. Each visit coincided with one of her girls' nights. My chest tightened as the pieces clicked into place. I could barely breathe. This was real. This was happening. By now, my paranoia had spilled into every part of my life. At work, I couldn't focus. My coworkers noticed I was distracted, but I waved them off, blaming the stress of becoming a dad. Even my friends asked if I was okay. Just busy, I'd say, forcing a smile. But at home, I couldn't fake it anymore. Every time Anna kissed me goodnight, I felt like I was lying to myself. Every time she laughed, I wondered who she was really thinking about. I decided I couldn't wait much longer. I needed definitive proof, not just for me, but for the confrontation I was building toward. If this ended in court or a messy divorce, I needed to be ready. That's when I hired the private investigator. I hated the idea at first. It felt invasive, like crossing some invisible line. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Anna had already crossed that line. If she was lying to me, if she was betraying our marriage, I had a right to know. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Harper, promised discretion. "Give me a week," she said. "I'll get you what you need." And she did. The photos she sent me were a punch to the gut. Anna and Lucas walking into a hotel together. Anna holding his hand. Anna laughing, her head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in months. The final image was the worst. Anna and Lucas kissing in the parking lot, oblivious to the world around them. That was it. I had all the proof I needed. It was time to confront her. The day I decided to confront Anna felt surreal, like walking through a fog where nothing quite seemed real. I spent the morning pacing the house, rehearsing the conversation in my head. Would I yell? Stay calm? Demand answers? Every scenario felt wrong, but the thought of staying silent felt worse. When Anna walked through the door that evening, she looked radiant as ever, a bag of groceries in one hand and her phone in the other. Her smile when she saw me was warm, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine or just practiced. "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting the bag on the counter. I didn't answer right away. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands felt clammy. How do you tell the person you love that you know their deepest betrayal? "Anna," I started, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk." Her brow furrowed, and she set her phone down. "Okay," she said cautiously. "What's going on?" I pulled out the photos Harper had sent me and placed them on the kitchen island. Anna's face went pale as her eyes darted from one image to the next. The silence between us stretched painfully long. "What is this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she picked up one of the photos. "This isn't what it looks like," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "I can explain." "Really?" I said, crossing my arms. "Because it looks pretty clear to me. You've been sneaking around with Lucas, staying at hotels, lying about girls' nights." What exactly am I missing here? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might deny everything. But then she broke. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice shaking. It started out innocent. He's just someone I could talk to, someone who listened. But then, it got complicated. Complicated, I repeated, my voice rising. You're carrying my child, Anna. Or at least I thought you were. How could you do this to us? She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. It's not like that, she said desperately. The baby is yours, I swear. Is it? I shot back. The words hung in the air like a weapon, and I could see the pain they caused. She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. Of course it's yours. I wouldn't lie about that. But I didn't believe her, not anymore. The trust between us had been shattered, and no amount of tears or promises could piece it back together. I need proof, I said coldly. A paternity test. Until then, I don't want to hear any more excuses. Anna nodded, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her guilt was finally crushing her. Okay, she whispered, if that's what it takes. That night, I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we'd gotten here. I had my answers, but they only brought more questions. Who was Anna, really? And was there any way to fix what she'd broken? The days leading up to the paternity test were excruciating. Anna and I barely spoke, moving around each other like strangers in the home we'd built together. Every glance she gave me was filled with guilt, but I couldn't bring myself to offer her even a shred of comfort. She'd made her choices, and now we were both paying the price. The morning of the test, Anna was unusually quiet. She sat across from me at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. I'm ready to go, she said softly, her voice breaking the tense silence. Good, I replied, my tone clipped. The drive to the clinic was quiet, the only sound coming from the hum of the car engine. My mind was a chaotic storm of emotions. Anger, fear, sadness, and, deep down, a sliver of hope. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe the baby really was mine. Maybe we could still salvage something from this mess. The test itself was straightforward. They took a sample from me and another from Anna, explaining that the results would take a few days. I barely heard them, my focus on the rigid set of Anna's shoulders as she avoided my gaze. When it was over, we left the clinic in silence. Back at home, I found myself pacing the living room, my thoughts spiraling. How had we gotten to this point? Just weeks ago, I was planning nursery colors and imagining midnight feedings. Now, I was waiting to find out if the baby I'd been so excited about was even mine. Anna stayed upstairs most of the day, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, she finally ventured down, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. Can we talk? She asked hesitantly. I gestured toward the couch, though my patience was running thin. I'm sorry, she started, her voice trembling. For everything. For lying. For hurting you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I never meant to ruin what we had. What we had, I repeated bitterly. You mean the marriage you decided wasn't enough? The family you put at risk? She flinched, but I didn't stop. What I don't understand is why. Why risk everything? Why him? Anna took a shaky breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was scared, she admitted. After we started trying for a baby and nothing happened, I felt like a failure. And when we finally got pregnant, it wasn't joy I felt. It was panic. He was a distraction. Someone who made me feel alive when everything else felt like pressure and expectation. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Pressure? Expectation? You mean the life we built together? I know how it sounds, she whispered. I know I messed up. But the baby is yours, I swear. I stared at her, searching for the truth in her eyes. But after everything I'd learned, I didn't know what to believe. The next few days were a blur of waiting and avoiding each other. I threw myself into work, desperate for any distraction from the gnawing uncertainty. When the clinic finally called with the results, My heart felt like it might explode. "This is it?" I muttered to myself, staring at my phone. I picked up the call, bracing for whatever was coming next. The call was brief. The nurse on the other end was polite, but her words sent a shockwave through me. "Mr. Edwards," she said, "we've completed the paternity test. The results are in. The baby is not your biological child." The world seemed to freeze. The phone slipped from my hand, landing with a soft thud on the floor as I processed the words. The baby was not mine. I don't know how long I stood there in shock, unable to move, to think, or to breathe. The reality of it hit me in waves. Every plan I'd made, every dream I'd built about our future, about fatherhood, it all shattered in an instant. I couldn't comprehend it. I picked the phone back up, my voice shaking when I spoke. "Are you sure?" I asked, desperate for any mistake, any error in the test. "Yes, Mr. Edwards," she confirmed. "The results are definitive. The father is not you." "Thank you," I muttered, hanging up without another word. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space around me, as if the truth might suddenly change if I didn't acknowledge it. But it was real. The baby I had been preparing for, the child I had already started loving, wasn't mine. And Anna had known all along. When Anna came downstairs later that evening, she found me in the same place, still processing the news. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands wringing nervously. I got the call," I said flatly. "The test results came back. It's not mine." She flinched as if the words physically struck her. "I'm sorry, Jack. I'm so sorry." I looked at her, the woman I had shared my life with for years, the woman I thought I knew completely. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, but all I could feel was betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to lash out at the woman who had deceived me. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. "How long?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. "How long have you been seeing him? And why didn't you just tell me?" Anna choked on her words, trying to find a way to explain a mess that couldn't be explained. "I never meant for any of this to happen, Jack. It wasn't about him. It was about me. About feeling lost. About feeling like I couldn't live up to everything we both wanted." She paused, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to hurt the baby." "The baby?" I repeated bitterly. "That's all you can say? That's what you were hiding behind? You didn't want to hurt the baby, but you hurt me. You hurt us both." "I never thought it would go this far," she whispered, her body trembling. "I never thought it would come to this. I wanted to tell you, Jack, but I couldn't. I was scared of losing everything. I didn't know how to fix it." Her words fell flat. All I could hear was the undeniable truth. The baby, the life we'd been preparing for, was just another lie. The silence between us was suffocating. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. There were so many questions, so many things I wanted to say, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. It felt like the moment I said anything, the reality of what had happened would be real, and I wasn't sure if I could face it. "I need space, Anna," I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. "I need time to figure out what I'm going to do. I can't do this right now." Her face crumpled as she reached out toward me, but I stepped back, my heart too full of hurt to let her touch me. "I'll leave," she whispered. "I'll go stay with my sister for a while. Just please know that I never meant for it to end like this. I'm sorry." As she turned and walked toward the door, I felt like I was watching my entire world unravel, piece by piece. Everything I had worked for, everything I thought was real, was gone. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. Anna was gone, and with her absence came an unbearable silence, a stark contrast to the life we had built together. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, her words echoing over and over. She had left that evening with a small suitcase and a promise to give me the space I needed. She texted me once after she arrived at her sister's, saying, "I'm sorry again. I'll wait for you to reach out when you're ready." I didn't respond. The first few days were a haze. I called into work, claiming I was sick, but in reality, I couldn't bring myself to face anyone. Instead, I spent hours sitting in the living room, staring at the baby items we'd already started accumulating. Tiny clothes, a crib, a stroller still in its box. Each one felt like a cruel reminder of a future that had been stolen from me. The hardest part was the flood of memories. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Anna had smiled when she first told me about the pregnancy, or how we'd sat on the couch flipping through name books. Was any of it real, or had it all been a carefully constructed lie? On the fourth day, Harper, the private investigator, called. "I wanted to check in," she said, her voice careful. "I know you've had time to process the results. Is there anything else you need from me?" I hesitated. A part of me wanted to let it go, to stop digging into a truth that had already shattered me. But another part, the part that needed answers, spoke up. "Did you find anything else?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Nothing new since the photos," she replied. "But if you want, I can look into Lucas more deeply, his background, his intentions. Just let me know." I thanked her and hung up, unsure of whether I wanted to know more. What difference did it make now? The damage was done. That evening, I finally forced myself out of the house. I went to a bar downtown, hoping a few drinks would dull the ache in my chest. The place was quiet, with just a handful of patrons scattered around. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and stared into the amber liquid like it held the answers I was searching for. "You look like you've had a rough week," the bartender said, his tone friendly but not intrusive. "You could say that," I replied with a bitter laugh. He didn't press, and I was grateful for the silence. But just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice behind me that made my blood run cold. "I didn't expect to see you here." I turned slowly, my grip tightening around the glass. It was Lucas. There he was, standing just a few feet away, his smug expression making my stomach churn. He didn't seem surprised to see me, and that only made me angrier. "You've got some nerve," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He shrugged, as if this were all some minor inconvenience. "Look, man, I didn't come here to cause trouble." "Trouble?" I repeated, standing now. "You've already caused more trouble than you can imagine." "I get it," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "You're angry, but Anna and it wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Like what?" I demanded. "You weren't supposed to ruin my marriage? Destroy my family? What exactly was your plan?" He had the audacity to look uncomfortable. "It wasn't planned," he said. "We didn't mean to hurt you. But things got complicated." I laughed bitterly. "Complicated? That's your excuse? You think that justifies any of this?" Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Let me make one thing clear," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You might have taken my wife, but you won't take anything else. Stay the hell away from me." Without waiting for a response, I stormed out of the bar, my chest heaving. That night, I realized something. I wasn't going to let Lucas, or Anna, dictate how this ended. I needed closure, not just for myself, but for the life I had thought we were building together. And if that meant confronting the full extent of the truth, then so be it. I spent the next week trying to make sense of it all. The truth of Anna's betrayal, the child that wasn't mine, the confrontation with Lucas. It all swirled together into a storm of emotions I couldn't escape. But somewhere amidst the chaos, a realization took root. I couldn't let this define me. Anna had made her choices, and so had Lucas. Now it was time for me to make mine. Anna reached out a few times, sending cautious texts and leaving tearful voicemails. I ignored most of them, letting the silence between us grow. But after days of reflection, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. If there was to be any kind of closure, we needed to face each other one last time. I texted her, "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. at the house." When Anna arrived, she looked different, tired, her once radiant glow replaced by the weight of guilt and uncertainty. She sat across from me at the dining room table, the same table where we'd once planned our future together. "I got your message," she said quietly. "I needed to talk to you face to face." I began, my tone firm but calm. I've had time to think, to process everything. And I've made my decision. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, bracing herself for what was coming. I'm filing for divorce, I said. The words felt heavy, but also freeing. There's no coming back from this, Anna. The lies, the betrayal. You broke something that can't be fixed. She sobbed softly, burying her face in her hands. I understand, she whispered. I hate myself for what I've done to you, Jack. To us. If I could take it back, I would. But you can't, I said simply. And that's why I need to move on. I deserve better. I deserve honesty and loyalty. And as much as it hurts to say goodbye, this is what's best for me. Anna nodded through her tears, her voice trembling. What about the baby? I hesitated, the pain of the situation cutting deep. That's something you and Lucas will have to figure out. It's not my responsibility anymore. Her sobs grew louder, but I stayed resolute. This was my moment to reclaim my life, to step away from the wreckage and start fresh. In the weeks that followed, I began the process of rebuilding. I threw myself into work, leaned on friends and family, and started therapy to untangle the web of emotions left behind. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the memories of our life together crept in and made me question everything. But little by little, I began to heal. One evening, I found myself sitting in the nursery we'd started to set up. The crib was still in its box, the walls bare. It was a room full of potential, a blank canvas for a future that no longer existed. But instead of despair, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Anna and I parted ways amicably, though the pain of our shared past lingered. She moved in with her sister, and as far as I knew, she was trying to figure things out with Lucas. I didn't ask for updates. As for me, I slowly started to rebuild. I took a solo trip to clear my head, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again when I was ready. Life didn't go back to the way it was. It became something new. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal hadn't just broken me. It had forced me to grow, to reevaluate what I wanted and deserved. And while it was the hardest thing I'd ever been through, it also gave me the chance to start over, stronger and wiser than before. This chapter of my life was over. But the story wasn't. Because I wasn't done. Not even close.